So in our last session, we had started discussing techniques of business forecasting, especially with respect to where in which we had divided it on the basis of qualitative techniques and quantitative techniques. And of qualitative techniques, we had discussed regarding market research techniques, past performance techniques, internal forecast, and deductive method. And in our today's session, uh, we shall see direct versus indirect method. If I'm not wrong, we had discussed this also, but then we'll just brief it out. Now, under direct method, what happens is that in an organization where there are lot of subordinate units. Now each of the units, they shall prepare estimates, and based on the estimate that are being prepared by each of the department, the company shall take the aggregate of all the departmental estimates, and based on this the organization shall prepare one estimate for the entire organization. Now, because they collect the information from subunit, later on the basis of that they prepare the final one. This method is also called as bottom-up method of forecasting. Now, as compared to this, we have indirect methods. Now, under indirect methods, uh, this is opposite of what direct method is. Now here first estimates are made for the entire trade that will happen, or for the entire organization, or even for the entire industry, and then the share of the individual units of that industry shall be ascertained. Now this method is called as top-down method of forecasting, because for the first it shall be done for the entire organization, then it shall be split down into different departments. So that is direct and indirect method. Then we have one more, that is jury of executive opinion. So in this method of forecasting, uh, what happens is the management shall bring together the top executives of different functional areas that are there in the organization. Now, in our organization, we have different departments, starting from the production. We have purchasing. We'll be having sales, marketing. We'll be having human resource. We do have financial department, and each of the department, they have their executives, the top executives. Now the opinion shall be collected from the top executives of each important department in the organization, and the organization supplies each of these executive with the necessary information relating to the things for which the forecasting has to be made, and it shall collect the opinion of these executives and their views on the particular related product, and on the basis the organization arrives at one particular conclusion. That is called as jury of executive opinion. So these are quite a few techniques of qualitative method of business forecasting. As against this, we have Quantitative techniques. Now, quantity, whenever we hear this particular term, we can understand that it is based on some numbers, or especially when we speak in terms of research or academia, it definitely represents some of the statistical techniques. Now they focus entirely on the pattern and also on the historical data on which these tests shall be done. And here what is important is that in such techniques or quantitative techniques, the data of the past performance of a product or product line, it shall be used and also analyzed so that it is able to establish some kind of trend or some kind of rate of change which may be shown on a increasing tendency or a decreasing tendency, or simple to tell, which can be shown drawn on a graph. So such kind of techniques are called as quantitative techniques, which shall be based on statistical methods of finding answers for question. And all these methods, they shall be depending on the past data. So what has been put up in your slide is quite a few methods of quantitative techniques. The first one is business barometer method. Now you might all have heard barometer. Barometer is nothing but a scale that is being used. Okay. Now this business barometer method, it is also been called as index number method. Now just how we use a barometer to use the atmosphere's pressure, similarly in business we use index numbers to measure the state of economy between two or more time lapse or two or more time period. Now whenever we use such index numbers, there are a lot of index numbers. Now when we use such index numbers in conjunction with one another, or when we combine two or more index numbers, normally such combination, they provide some kind of indication as to where the economy is directed to. And that is why in business they use such index number based techniques to know the business environment. Now if I have to give an example, maybe whenever there is an increase in the amount of investment, usually what happens, it brings an upspring in the economy. So this increased investment or this economy being better, it shall be reflecting higher employment, and also it shall be representing income opportunity after some particular time period. So with the help of this business activity index numbers, it normally becomes easier to focus the future course of action, because it projects the expected change that shall be happening in the relative activities within a lag of some period. Now this lag period is nothing but the difference between the two periods. Now though this lag period, it is difficult to predict in exact terms, it gives some advanced signals for likely changes that is going to happen in the future. So this forecast, or the one who does such forecast, they should always keep in mind that this barometers, or in specific what we can call as index numbers. Now, even they have their own limitations, and to not to face such limitations, precautions are always should be taken when people use this index numbers or barometer methods. That is to tell, these barometers, they can be used only when general trends, they may reject the business of the forecast. So it is always advised that different index numbers should be prepared for different activities in the business organization. So that is in brief what business barometer is all about. Then we have trend analysis. So what is this trend analysis? Now this is also known as time series analysis. Now, normally this time series analysis or trend analysis, they involve trend, or what we call as seasonal variation, or what we refer to as cyclic variation. And also sometimes it does include irregular variations or even random variation. So all such kinds of variations shall be included in time series analysis. Now one thing that is noteworthy here is, as the name suggests, this trend analysis or time series analysis, it shall be done for certain time intervals, certain specific time intervals, for normally for a long time period. And this technique is normally used when data are available for doing such projections. And also it shall be done for, as I said, long period of time, and where the trend is clearly visible and the trend is also stable. So it is based on the assumption that past trend will continue in the future, and this is considered also valid for short time projection. So, and in such trend analysis, normally they use different formulas which can fit the general trend. That is how trend analysis works. And the third that we have is extrapolation method. Now, this extrapolation method, it is based on the trend analysis or time series that we have. Now, this extrapolation method, it believes that the behavior of this time series, now that the behavior that is there in the past, it will continue in the future, and it shall continue in the future also, and on the basis of this, and belief, the future shall be predicted. Now the trend analysis and the extrapolation method, it might you might hear it as one and the same, but then this method, it slightly differs from the trend analysis method. Now under it, effects of various components of the time series, it shall not be separated. but it shall be taken in their totality as against that of trend analysis. So that is the one difference. So it assumes that the effect of these factors is of a constant and stable pattern and would also be continuing in the future. Then we have regression analysis method. This you might have studied under your business research methodology. So what happens is that in this method, two or more interrelated series of data you will be having, and it shall be used to disclose the relationship between the two variables that you have considered there. So there are a number of variables which normally affects a business, and that is the same maybe in the business situation or in the economic situation or in the situation of the organization. So those elements which affects the concern shall be taken into consideration, and the various method of regression analysis shall be used to find a relationship among all these elements. Now this analysis it normally helps in isolating the effects of various factors to a large extent. Now, we can take an example for this. Now normally in a business organization, if the elements that we take are sales expenditure and sales profit, normally there is a positive relationship between the sales expenditure and the sales profit. So it is possible when such estimations shall be done to estimate the sales on the basis of expenditure on the sales that are being done, and also profits on the basis of the projected sales. But one thing that we have to see is that here under there are lot of assumptions that are being made. The mainly one that except the elements that are taken, other things shall remain the same is the one assumption that we normally take. That is regression analysis method. Then we have economic input output model method. Now this economic input output model method, it is also known as end use technique. Now the technique, it is based on the hypothesis of various sectors of economic industries which are interrelated. Now such interrelationship, we call it as coefficient in mathematical terms. So this coefficient that is there, we normally find answers based on that. Now that is to tell, take into consideration the requirement of the cement by a country. Now this requirement, it might be well predicted on the basis of its rate of usage by various sectors of the economy, and also by adjusting this rate on basis of how the various sectors might behave in the future. Now, as the data that are required for such analysis, Uh, it is easily available. This particular technique is used in business units. And as against to this, sorry, not against to this, the last one that we have is econometric model. So, whenever you see this word econometric model, or when you hear this word econometric, it refers to the science of economic measurement. So the mathematical models are used in the economic model to express the relation among economic events simultaneously, so that it is able to arrive at a particular economic model, and a number of equations are formed with the help of time series. But one thing that we have to keep in mind here is these equations that we are speaking, they are not easy to formulate. But then the availability of the latest technology, especially the computer and all other techniques that we use today, it has made the formulation of such equations far more easier than before. So the forecasts, they can be solved by using this equation. So we saw some types, six different types of qualitative techniques, six different types of quantitative techniques. So it can be said that all these techniques, they may give different result in making forecasting. That's why an organization can choose any of these techniques, keeping in mind the size, the nature of the business accuracy that is necessary, and also the cost benefit factor that the organization is having. So this is one way of seeing into the types of business forecasting method. So some of the qualitative techniques that we did that can be taken. Uh, See, in this particular slide, we are taking quantitative techniques, time series techniques of forecasting, causal modeling, and technological forecasting. Now, some of the things that we had not taken there, we shall discuss here under. Now, panel of executive opinion, we discussed what it is. So one of the point that is like to be discussed here is that normally this qualitative forecasting technique, it normally relies on individual judgment, or a group who has come together to take such a decision. It normally relies on the opinion of theirs. So when quantitative data normally is not available, we normally use this informed experts or qualitative data. So this panel of executive opinion we did discuss in earlier slide. So the second one that we have is here, historical analogy. So this particular method, it is normally used. Now it is based on the belief that the future trends, it normally develop in the same direction as the past trend. Now this is something like your, now this is nothing but your time series analysis. Now it normally assumes that the future it shall remain as it used to be there in the past. Hence, all the past trends, it shall be plotted on graph or chart to show how the trend is or how the curve is moving. So normally there are three different methods here under. First one is they take the current year's actual performance as the base for the projection of the future. And under second method, what they normally do is that they increase, certain percentage with the last year's actual performance to project the future events. Now, while you have studied statistics, you might have come across such method, or when you have studied business research method, you might have come across such a way where they would have given the actual cost, and they would have given you that for current year projection you'll have to take into consideration that there shall be increase of 10% more expense on certain elements, and based on that data and adjustment that you will have to make, you shall be taking into consideration how much changes will happen for this particular time period. And under third method, what they normally do is they normally try to average out the actual performance of previous few years. Then we have Delphi technique. Now this Delphi technique is one another judgmental technique. Now what happens is that it normally takes into consideration a panel of experts, and the poll shall be done and thereby gathers the opinion of all these experts on the specific topic. Now normally the forecasting unit it decides the experts whose opinion they want to know. Now normally here under, though there are a lot of opinion, there are lot of experts, each expert will not know who the other experts will be. So the experts they make their response and they shall submit it. Now they express their views independently without the knowledge of the response of the others. Now, if at all here under they consider it on the basis of anonymous votes, normally a pattern of response shall be drawn for the future events, and it shall be determined. Then we have market survey. This market survey also we discussed in our previous method. Now this is nothing but the forecast can be a poll in a person, or it can also be in the form of questionnaire. The respondents can be customers, clients, and it can be on the subject matter of them also, or can be on also some future behavior. Now we shall see some time series technique of forecasting. So this time series technique of forecasting, they are based on the assumption that the past is good predictor of what might happen in the future. Normally this time series, as we discussed, they prove useful when a lot of historical data are available. Normally when stable trends are apparent. Now such trends, they identify a pattern which represents a combination of trend, seasonal and cyclic factors based on historical data. Now such methods, they try to identify the best fit line by eliminating the effect of random fluctuation which can be possibly found. Then we have moving averages. So as the name, this is nothing but, remember in time series I said three different ways. So these are three different ways that we are speaking. So moving averages here in this method, the average of the limited number of the data which are significant for the result that is necessary, it shall be calculated and updated as the new results would be available, and thereby adding the last result and dropping off the oldest one. So that is how this happens in the moving averages. Uh, to better explain it, like the organization might want to know the trend analysis of the sales for the 15 years, and it does not do it for one time basis, it shall be doing it on a continuously basis. So for the first time, if at all the 15 years marks up from 2005 to 2020, the next time what happens is 2005 shall be removed and 2021 shall be added. That is called as moving exponential. Sorry, moving average. Then we have exponential smoothing. Now this is also similar to moving average. The only difference that is there that it gives more weight to recent results and lesser importance for earlier ones. And because it gives more importance for recent information, this exponential smoothing is usually more accurate than moving averages. Then we have causal modeling. So in this category of forecasting technique, causal models are constructed so as to explain, the relationship between the factors that are to be forecasted and other factors. If we take example, the factor could be sales and other factors could be, something like price of advertising or price of marketing or the product availability or any such thing. So normally there shall be regression analysis, econometric models and economic indicators. So this particular regression analysis, they are equations which are created to predict one variable on the basis of the other variable. That is to tell, as we discussed earlier, the same meaning. Maybe the sales based on the price, the time, the personal information of economic levels. So the relationship of two different elements shall be considered here. Now econometric models also we discussed. Now other than what we discussed, what I can tell here is that It normally uses several multiple regression equations so that it is able to predict, the main or major economic shifts and the potential impact such shifts on the organization. Normally, this econometric model, it answers what if questions, and also it helps investigate, the impact of various changes in the environment and also in the major segments of uh, enterprise. Then we have economic indicators. Now, this economic indicators, they are data that can normally forecast the future state of economy. Now, to give example of such indicators, it include, the current rates of maybe national productivity, inflation, cost of living index, and also level of unemployment also could be possibly taken here under. Then the fourth one that we can take here is we also have technological forecasting. Now, as the name suggests, normally this technological forecasting, it is used on predicting what future technologies are, likely to emerge and how they are likely to, maybe prove economically feasible for the business organization. Normally, it deals with technological changes that can affect the organization. Now, to talk in terms of reality, some technological advancement, such as maybe computers, the word processing, or lasers and pace technology, they have greatly affected how the business shall be done or the way of doing business. So now, other than these mathematical models or qualitative models, how much important they are, even technological forecasting is also equally important. So the three things that we can take here is first one is cross impact analysis. So this particular method, it normally attempts to identify and also determine the significance of relationship and also interaction between specific events so as to know the impact. Now this is a 2 or 3 dimensional matrix answer. So normally a 2 dimensional or 3 dimensional matrix shall be developed. Or you might have seen some kinds of 2 into 2 matrix or 2 into 3 matrix. So now based on what the organization needs or what the organization wants to know, a 2 dimensional or 3 dimensional matrix shall be prepared, and thereby they shall try to understand what are the effects of such elements on the business organization, and they shall be finding answers to the question that they have at their hand. The second one that is there is morphological analysis. Now this technique, it is useful in finding the multiple uses of any recent technology. So it identifies various dimensions of the object. Not only that, it also evaluates all varieties and combinations of those dimensions so that it is able to find the practical uses of them. Then we have substitution effect. Now this technique, it assumes that one technology which shows a relative improvement in performance over the older technology, it will ultimately be substituted for the factor with a lower performance. And that is how normally it happens. Whichever is least performing, it shall be replaced by the ones which are better performing in comparison. Now it normally indicates a patterned fashion for certain technologies, wherein technologies shall be continuously evolving and technology shall be made continuously better. So each of these forecasting techniques has their own inherent limitations. Hence, manager should validate one source of forecasting information with additional sources. So these are one type of business forecasting method where we have divided it on the basis of four, that is qualitative, quantitative, causal modeling and technological forecasting. Now this is yet another technique of business forecasting where we have considered opinion of different person. So here under we have direct method, that is what we have discussed, what we call as bottom up method. We have that is normally what we do, we collect information from all the departments and once after collecting we shall be deciding what would be the uh, final projection for the entire industry. As against that we have indirect method, it is called as top down method. So here forecastings are made for the whole enterprise, then they are made to each sub level. So next we have historic method. Under historic method, the forecasting is based on assumption normally that history repeats. So that it also tells that there is a relationship between past events, their circumstance and the causes, and thereby the result is established. And on the basis of all this such relationship, forecasting shall be made for the future. Then we have joint opinion. Now joint opinion is something like jury of expert opinion. Okay, here a committee of expert is formed. The members of this committee, they make surveys of particular situation or circumstance. Once after the survey is made, the opinions of all the experts are taken and thereafter these opinions are analyzed. And the forecasting, they are made on the basis of such opinions. Now then we have deductive method. Deductive method also we have discussed, but to brief it out, this does not consider the past. The deductive method, it starts with the present and it carefully studies and analyzes uh, the present circumstance and the present situation. So here forecasting is based on the assumption that the result which are obtained in the past in some of the particular circumstances, it cannot be the base for the same circumstance which might happen in the future. Now, because many factors change in the course of time due to changes in economic, social, and political circumstance, and also due to trade cycle. Now in all this, the facts and informations are analyzed and then the future trends shall be decided by keeping in view the factors which are likely to influence the future decisions. So the one thing that we had not discussed was scientific analysis. That's why this particular page of information has been considered. So this method, it is one of the latest approaches which is used in making business forecast. So under this method, the principles of lot many disciplines are taken into consideration. The principles of economics, the principles of mathematics, the principle of statistics are to name few common disciplines that are considered. And all the principles are applied. And on the basis of this, business models shall be prepared. And these models, they form the basis of business forecasting. So normally this scientific method of analysis, it answers quite a few complex questions of the organization, such as what is the relationship between the cause and the effect that is happening, and thereby it shall answer what is the reason of such relationship. It also speaks of what is the possibility of the existence of this relationship which might happen in the future, or what are the changes which may place the economic or the business and the social and political conditions. And also it answers the questions such as will these changes affect the future trends, and what is the other factors which affect the future forecasting. So all such kind of complex questions shall be answered by scientific analysis. Yes. So this is yet another way of seeing into business forecasting. So here they have not divided it on the basis of qualitative or quantitative data, but they have selected it to be the whole. Now I shall just brief it out. Quite a few methods we have not discussed, that I shall be picking up and that I shall be discussing. So similarity events method, it is called as the historical analogy method, or what we do here is we have the past events and on the basis of that we shall predict the future. And we have discussed the jury of executive option, where we consider the viewpoint of different experts. Then we have service method. That is nothing but to tell, as simple as it is nothing but the field survey, which is conducted to collect information. Normally, this survey method we try to find the attitude of the people here. Then we have salesperson's opinion. This particular thing we did not discuss. So the sales force, of the existing product, it can be forecasted with the help of opinions of salesperson. So these salespersons, normally they are the ones who are very close to the consumer or the customer. So the opinions which are being given by these salesperson, they prove to be of great value for some of the specific customer based and salesperson based industries. So a reasonable sales trend normally can be predicted based on the opinion of these sales persons. The business barometers, we have discussed it, and we have expectations of consumer that we did not discuss. So under this method, normally a survey is conducted in order to know the future needs of consumers, and an overall forecast can be made on the basis of the expectations of the consumers of the organization. Normally, when an organization does this kind of survey, the organization is able to find out the consumer preference impact, the consumer preference. And also, quite a few times it can find out the impact of maybe the organization has taken the attempt of doing some kind of advertisement because it had to market its product. So the impact of advertisement on the buying behavior is one of the things which can be known by doing expectation of consumer method of business forecasting. So if you closely observe, the name has been given as expectation of consumer, but it is just other way of telling marketing research method. And we have time series analysis that we discussed, where on the basis of the past data which are available for a continuous time period in the past have been considered. We have Delphi method, where we take into consideration the opinion of expert. Here the difference is that the experts shall not be disclosed to one another. Now this particular Delphi method, to tell more about it, it was developed in Rand Corporation initially in the 1969 to focus the military events. Then it has been applied to other areas. And extrapolation we discussed. Here, here we estimate the future behavior from the known data that we have. And we have regression analysis that we discussed. We have input and output analysis and econometric models, all of which we had discussed. So this is yet another way of seeing into things, that is qualitative forecasting and quantitative forecasting. All this that we have discussed, that is judgmental forecasting, Salesforce composite method, user expectations method, um, users experience method, Delphi technique. Brainstorming is something that we did not discuss. So brainstorming is that it is normally used to bring innovative ideas for the given problem. Normally how it is done, a group meeting is conducted. Now criticisms of any idea, however stupid or however impractical it can be, it is considered first in the beginning. Later on, whatever does not cannot be taken to the next step shall be eliminated. Now here under brainstorming, free flow of idea is facilitated and maximization of idea is the main aim. So out of the ideas generated, good ideas or the ideas which are workable shall be implemented. Then we have business parameters, time series analysis, regression analysis, economic model and input output analysis that we have considered. So these are quite a few methods of business forecasting. So the last topic that we have under chapter 2 is the resource based view and the internal analysis of the organization that we have to do. Now speaking about this organizational internal analysis or the internal environment of business organization, or in particular to speak about the resource based view. Now this resource based view, it is also called as RBV analysis. So what do we do under this resource based view or internal analysis? Now this resource based view, it is such a model that views resources as the key component for the company's better performance. And this RBV, now it is a way to deal with accomplishing competitive advantage. And this particular method, it was developed in 1980s and 1990s. Okay, so that is how it works. You can see the resource based view, they divided into tangible, intangible. That is to tell the organization relies on both the resources, and it tells that there must be heterogeneous and immobileness, and they'll do the VRIO resource. What is that? We shall see later. Uh, and this analysis, it provides competitive advantage. The main aim of this resource based view or trying to understand the internal analysis of the organization is that by doing such analysis, they shall see to that competitive advantage is brought to the business organization. Now, in the beginning, this particular resource-based view. Now, it was the viewpoint of Werner Felt B. Okay, this person Werner Felt B. He had given this work in his book called as the resource-based view of the firm. And on the other hand, there were other people like Prahalad and Hamel. They had come up with the same idea in their book, the core competence of the corporation. And there is Bernie J, who has the same point of view in his book, Firm Assets and Sustained Competitive Advantage. And there are lot other people who have given the same viewpoint. Now, the supporters of all these perspectives, you know, they tell the same thing that as opposed to taking a you know aggressive environment association or a grander environment association to look inside the organization itself, so the organization is able to discover the resources that are there within itself, from which the organization is able to bring competitive advantage. That is the main thing here. That is, it analyzes more and more its own internal resources, so that by using its own resources, by knowing its own strength, the organization is able to bring in competitive advantage for the organization. So this particular model, that what you can see on your slide right now, it speaks about the main purpose of resource-based analysis. Now this resource-based view is seen in this model as such a place or such a premise for competitive advantage of a firm. And to bring such competitive advantage, all that is necessary, it lies basically in the utilization of valuable resources. Now all this bundle of valuable resources, it can be tangible or it can be intangible resource which is there in the hands of firms. Now what are tangible resource? Tangible resources can be financial assets or any other assets the organization has. Intangible assets, it can be technological know-how, it can be knowledge that is there, it can be the skills of the people. So the resources could be anything, the tangible resource or the intangible resource which the organization owns. And when the organization is dependent on these resources, okay, it tries to change a short run competitive advantage into a maintained competitive advantage. And what you can see the box as heterogeneous. Now that particular word, it speaks that the assets that the organization has, they are to be heterogeneous in nature and not splendidly versatile. And it also tells that these important assets that should be neither splendidly imitable nor substitutable without great effort. So when the resources, it could be tangible or intangible, they are having the characteristic that they are not that are to be heterogeneous, that are to be immobile. Immobile here represents which cannot be imitated or changed very easily. When that is the case, then the organization is able to bring competitive advantage. Now this resource-based view, now it has to move along two parallel and also interconnected course. Okay, that is, first one is value added or value addition, and the second one is sustainable competitive advantage. Now when we speak this value added or this value addition, it normally sees how the organization takes the merchandise or raw materials from its suppliers and then transfers it into completed product. The second one that we spoke was sustainable competitive advantage. And over the past previous class, I have explained what this sustainable competitive advantage. Now, this sustainable competitive advantage, it inspects the uncommon assets that empower the and also enable the organization to compete in the organization. So what we have to understand here is, uh, the basic guideline of resource-based view is that organizations, they contrast in essential ways, as every firm has some kind of unique resources for itself. That could be tangible and intangible assets and can also be organizational capacity to make use of those assets. Now every firm, they are able to create abilities from these assets, and in the long run able to turn them into resources, especially where they can find competitive advantage. Here what we have to remember is that you have resource. The older resource, we should be able to turn it into competitive advantage, not only for the short term time period perspective, but also for a longer time perspective. So what you can see in the slide is 7 components of resource based sustainable competitive advantage. That is to tell, normally when the top executive or the administrators, when they start to differentiate their company's assets, they normally come up with different tests so that they can figure out which of those assets represent the strengths of the organization, which of those can represent the weakness, or in other words, to take this in the words of management, uh, it does all different tests so that it is able to find out which resources generate core competences, uh, which can be the source of sustained competitive advantage. In doing so, this research based view, it has tended to seven key components, which is able to figure out possibly what can bring profitable resources for the organization. So the first one that is taken into consideration is the acquired resource. This speaks about what are the resources the organization has in its hand for the benefit of itself. Whether the resources that it owns, it can be used for bringing some kind of competitive advantage. And remember, whenever we see tell resource, it is not only the raw materials or the natural resources the organization use in producing a product from the state of raw material to the output. It is not only that, the acquired resources, it also includes maybe the financial resource. Now, the more and more the financial resource the organization has, yes, sometimes it can be benefited for the organization in bringing all other resources. It can also be the human resource the organization has, and also it can be the skills it is in the form of the human resource, the knowledge that is present in the form of the employees of the organization. Maybe not for all the companies, maybe not for the production companies, but there are quite a few of service related companies or quite a few technological based company wherein the knowledge of the people matters a lot, maybe like that of legal consultancies, where the intelligence of the people matter a lot than any other kind of the resources the possibly the organization can have in its hand. The next one is innovative capability. Now, innovative capability speaks about doing things in a different way. And this different way always has to be proving itself to be better than the earlier ones that are being used. Or, in other words, it is using or doing the existing things in a different way, or coming up with a different way of doing activities in the business. It can be doing it entirely different, or it can be the doing the same thing in a different way. Then being truly competitive. Now, competitive is something where you do not use unethical measure, is what they are trying to tell. Now, in business world, definitely there is competition, and the extreme level of competition shall be rivalry. So here they are telling the organization it is always better off if it is competitive in nature than being a rivalry in nature. And this particular word, being truly competitive, it has more meaning than possibly what we can discuss over a hour of time period. Okay, now competitiveness comes from, it can come from a lot of ways. So one of the way of seeing this resource or bringing in this competitive advantage is where the organization is actually competitive than acting in any kind of unethical way. Then we have sustainability. So what is this sustainability? Now sustainability is something which represents there is continuous growth. That is, every next time is better than the earlier one. And doing so, the basic thing that has to be remembered is that there shall be no kind of compromise made for the future. So that brings in sustainability. And you have appropriability. Appropriability speaks that whatever resource the organization has, those resources should be something which are appropriate for the business organization. And we have durability. Durability speaks of something which can be used over and over again, or the life of something which does not comes into end in the near future. And we have imitability. Imitability, as we discussed earlier, it speaks about something that when the organization is in the business, when it is having competition, it should have such resources which possibly cannot be which cannot be copied by others, or at least without having put a large amount of knowledge to it or large amount of effort to it. The competitors should not be able to imitate all those resources, and such resources can bring competitive advantage for the organization. And in doing so, we have VRIO framework. Now, in detail, you can study about it, but I shall be telling it in a very brief way. This VRIO framework or VRIO framework. Now, whenever the organization does this VRIO framework, it gives answers for question as like, is the resource of the organization enough? What does it do? What is the capacity of the organization? Whether the company can withstand it. V stands for valuable here. R stands for rare. I stands for whether the resources are inevitable, and O stands for whether the resources are organized. I shall repeat it once again. V stands for valuable, where it asks the questions whether the resources are valuable. R stands for rare, whether it here it asks the question whether the organization's resources they are rare in nature. Then we have I, inimitable, which asks the question whether the organization's resources are inimitable in nature. And we have O, which stands for organized, which asks the questions whether the organization resources are organized. Now for all the question, if the answer is that yes, the resources are valuable, yes, that the resources are rare in nature, Yes, that the organization's resources are such that it is possibly unable to imitate it. And if the answer is that yes, the organization resources are organized, all such things shall bring sustainable competitive advantage for the organization. Now, if at all the answer is that the resources are not valuable, then it shall bring competitive disadvantage. Now, if the organization's resources are not rare in nature, then it shall bring competitive parity. And if the organization's resources are such that it is immutable in nature, then it can only bring temporary competitive advantage and not a competitive advantage in the long run. And whenever the organization's resources are such that it is not organized in nature, it simply represents that there are a lot of resources or there are a lot of competitive advantage which has not been used by the organization. Now, what are this? What is this VRIO analysis? And what is this? How does it has a connection to strategic planning? Now, keeping in mind, the final goal, the end goal, where the organization can promote, normally a feasible competitive advantage as one of the asset which ought to be, valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized. This particular VRIO structure is something which establishes the internal analysis. So each one of that is valuable. Now valuable, in other words, it also speaks about profitable. Now this valuable or profitable, it speaks about all the asset or an asset or which is significant on the off chance that is which offers the association or some kind of assistance with meeting an external threat or exploit an opportunity for the organization. So all such resources which can turn off any kind of external threat or which can help the organization take advantage of the opportunity, such resources are called as valuable resources or profitable resource. So one thing that we'll have to note here is that such resources, there are chances that they may not offer the firm uh, any kind of help with outperforming their rivals, but uh, in many cases it can be marked with some kind of quality. So this regular competitive foundation of firms, it has to be efficiency, quality, customer responsiveness or innovation. All such brings profitability or valuable for the organization. Or in simple words, what I said, this efficiency, quality, innovation or customer responsiveness. Any resource which has the off chance to achieve these four things, then such a resource shall be important for the business organization. The next thing is rare. Now, rare, as the meaning suggests, as by its definition. So, resource is rare simply if it is not widely possessed by other competitors. So, of the criteria, this is the probably the easiest one to judge. Now, there is difference between what is rare and what is valuable. Rare is something what a company's competitor does not have at all. Valuable is something which values more as compared to that of competitors, but it need not always be rare. So to tell this, we can take example of Coke. Now, Coke's brand name is valuable, but then most of Coke's competitors such as Pepsi or any other brand, they also have widely recognized brand name. So this makes the name of Coke, you know, valuable but not rare. Of course, Coke's brand it may be the most recognized, but that makes it more valuable, not rare. So that is one of the example. And we have inimitable. Now, inimitable is something where an asset is matchless and which is non-substitutable. So on the off chance that is, troublesome for any other firm to get it or substitute something else in its place. So this is most likely the hardest criteria to look at, and also in the considering the fact that sufficiently given time is necessarily to be allotted, and also it is able to cash any kind of benefits by this asset can be done only in it is not inimitable. And the last but not least, we have organized. So an asset is sorted out if the firm can, really utilize it. For the most part, organization is every now and again ignored by system, which is in light of the fact that it regularly manages the internal workings of the firm's administration. So yet again, here first they are speaking about resource and capabilities. They have given example. It can be financial, human, material, non-material, which has which are in the name of the organization and its capacity. Then comes the VRIO analysis. Uses the 4 VRIO questions to evaluate the resource or capabilities, and based on the answer, if it is yes, how can we maintain or improve these resources and capacity? If no, is there the potential to improve the resources or capacities? And if the answer is no, then plan to get back to the resource capability when the condition change. And if the answer is that there is potential to improve, then the organization has to use strategy map, or it is the activity where it uses the most promising resource to formulate strategic hypothesis. So this is an example that you can take down, where they have taken VRIO and they have taken 5 elements, that is competitive disadvantage, competitive parity, temporary competitive advantage, unused competitive advantage, and sustainable competitive advantage. It simply tells when the organization's resources is not valuable, then it is competitive advantage. The second one tells that if the organization's resources are valuable, but it is not rare in nature, then it can be a state of competitive parity. The third one tells that if the organization's resources are valuable, the resources are rare, but it can be imitable, then it can only bring temporarily competitive advantage. The fourth element is that if the organization's values are rare, if it is valuable, if it is not imitable, but then the organization is not organized, then it speaks about a stage where the competitive advantage is not being used. And the final element where all the things are positive, that the organization's resources are valuable, it is rare in nature, it is not being able to imitate it by the competitors, and the organization is also organized. That is such a stage which can bring sustainable competitive advantage for the organization. And to finish off this VRIO step, what is done is that first the organization will have to identify its own assets, strength and weakness. So that is the first step, wherein the organization is able to identify its own assets, strength and weakness. The second step is that it will have to combine the quality into particular capacity. So when it is able to combine the quality into capacity, the third one is appraisal. Appraisal may be of profit potential. It can be of sustainable competitive advantage. The appraisal can be the ability to convert it into a profitable proposition. All these things are appraisal. The fourth step is to select strategy, that is the firm's resources and also capability, which are relative to external opportunity. So the final step is to identify if there are any resource gap, and if yes, then the organization will have to invest in upgrading the weakness and thereby making the possibly the strength for business organization. So that is all about VRIO steps. And if I am not